her question is, why do so many Christians think you can't be perfect? What law lens? If you have a certain law lens, say human imperial law lens, then what's the answer to what perfection is?
Behavior, no wrong acts.
Rule keeping, behaviors, deeds, actions. It has nothing to do with really motive of the heart. But if you have the design law, then you understand that it is not actually about how well you carry out deeds or tasks. It's about how pure the motive of your heart is. That's it. And so Paul says in Romans that sin, whatever is not of faith or trust, is sin. When the heart is restored to trust and you have that heart's desire to always honor God and do what he wants, you still may fail in the accomplishment of the task because we're weak, we have foibles, we trip, we fall, we stumble, but our heart is not in rebellion because we love God and we love others and our intention is to honor God. And then when we slip and stumble and we realize that actually didn't work out like our heart's desire was, we grieve. Oh, what a wretched man am I. Sometimes I find I'm doing the things I didn't even want to do. That heart is in grief. That heart is still perfect. As Job, we have examples of this. Job was perfect and righteous in all his ways. No one on the earth like him. Does that mean he was sinless? No, it means he'd been restored to love and trust, and nothing could shake him out of his loyalty. No loss of finances, no loss of family, no physical health problems, no theological debates. Nothing could shake him from his love and loyalty to God. He didn't understand it, but he was so faithful in his love and devotion that he said, even if God were to kill me, I will still trust him. That's a perfect person. You see that in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego on the plain of Dura. And they get confronted by Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar gives them another chance. And they say to Nebuchadnezzar, we know that our God can deliver us from the fire. But even if he doesn't, we won't bow. They didn't know what God would do. They know what he could do. But they were so committed to their faithful loyalty to God that they would rather die than break that trust or faith. That therefore, they were perfect. Okay? And that's what Bible perfection is. A transformation of heart, devotion, and loyalty to have in your heart to always honor God, and love others, regardless of how well you carry out the task. Since I put this idea out there in writing and in our class, I've heard from around the circle that there are those critics who try to impugn what we teach here, finding a quote from one of the founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, of our church, where she wrote that none that died in the flood found salvation. They all died in rebellion against God. And because of that, the critics of our ministry use that to impugn what I just said. And do you recognize that in no way does it impugn what I just said? Because I was not focusing on whether any of the wicked were saved. I was focusing on the character and methods of God and whether God provided opportunity for them, not whether any individual took advantage of the opportunity. That's a second and completely different question. I have no idea whether anyone availed themselves of the evidence of the raining waters and rising floods before they actually drowned and repent. I have no idea of that. But that wasn't the question. The question is, was God's action in bringing the flood judicial, inflicting pain, suffering, and death, or was it therapeutic to save the human species? And all benefited from his action. But even their own theology, the critics of ours, contradicts themselves. When you have an imposed law model, you will always have contradictions that impugn your own position. So for instance, those who insist that God's law works like human law, in that model, when does punishment occur? Before or after judgment? And the judgment in that law model is a future event from the flood. So even in that law model, what God was doing at the flood could not have been punishment for sin because judgment hadn't happened yet. It's contradictory. Worse. Was the flood, the people who died in the flood, did they die the first death or the second death? First. The sleep death. That's the same death Daniel died. Daniel, you're going to sleep until the resurrection, God told him. Is that the punishment for sin death? No, it's the second eternal death. So even if they want to say that, what happened to the flood was not punishment for sin, because the punishment for sin is eternal death. They do this all the time, contradiction after contradiction, and obfuscation after obfuscation. You will find that people who want to hold this other model will constantly take evidences of sleep death, first death, and equate that to eternal death. And they will find places like the flood or Sodom and Gomorrah, other places where God used power to put people asleep and say, therefore, God kills the wicked in the end. That would be like saying an anesthesiologist who puts somebody to sleep and then wakes them up is the same as a serial killer who murders people. It's not the same. God puts people to sleep and he wakes them all up at some point in time. Sometimes he puts people to sleep.